I stood there in the sterile, wood-paneled family courtroom, trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of Judge Hoffman. The large digital display screen beside her showed a chart of my financial failures in bright red numbers. She's broke. She can't even afford proper housing or decent food and clothes for the children, Tiffany Westfield said with a practiced smirk, gesturing to printouts from my sparse social media accounts. She doesn't even attend PTA meetings or know the names of her children's friends. Why should she get them, she said. I clenched my jaw and stayed quiet, feeling my hands trembling beneath the table. I wouldn't give Victor the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Judge Hoffman nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on Victor's impressive financial statements. That moment felt like a vacuum pulling air from my lungs. All I could think about were Noah and Lily. What would happen if they were taken from me and handed to a man who only cared about maintaining his perfect Instagram family? I couldn't afford a lawyer like Tiffany Westfield with her custom-tailored suit and diamond earrings. I couldn't afford anything, really. I was surviving on cash payments from cleaning houses. But I was here. I showed up, and I was doing everything humanly possible for my children. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that quiet terror where your body freezes but your mind screams, my 7-year-old son stood up. His small shoulders squared with determination. "Mom," Noah said, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, "can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's office safe when I was looking for my tablet?" The room froze. Every head turned. Victor stiffened, his perfectly styled hair suddenly seeming too rigid. Tiffany blinked like she'd been struck. Even Judge Hoffman stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what letter Noah meant. My heart hammered against my ribs. He had never mentioned any letter, but I nodded. As he walked toward the bench with that folded paper in his small hand, everything changed. I, Elaine Barrett, wasn't always the woman who sat trembling in court, afraid to speak. I used to be Ms. Barrett, the third-grade teacher parents requested for their children. I had classroom achievement awards, friends I met for coffee on weekends, and a 5-year plan that felt achievable. But when I married Victor, things changed, gradually at first, then suddenly all at once. Victor wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous, and persuasive. He drove a luxury car and talked about his vision for our future. He told me I didn't need to keep teaching with his real estate development career taking off. He said I should stay home, focus on our family, and let him handle the finances. "You've worked with other people's kids long enough," he said one evening, massaging my shoulders. "You deserve to enjoy our own family without the stress of teaching." I didn't realize what I was sacrificing when I agreed. My financial independence, my professional identity, my support network. I became increasingly invisible in my own life, my teacher certification slowly expiring as the years passed. After Lily was born, Victor installed a budgeting app on my phone that sent him alerts for every purchase. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was scrutinized. If I bought groceries without using his approved coupons, I'd face cold silence for days. When I mentioned renewing my teaching license, he'd pull up spreadsheets showing how childcare would cost more than I'd earn, saying, "We don't need your tiny teacher's salary. We need you to be a good mother." By the time he left, I had nothing. No active professional credentials, no savings, no credit in my name. He had systematically removed my access to our joint finances, moved in with his influencer girlfriend, and hired Tiffany immediately. I couldn't even afford the initial consultation fee with the least expensive lawyer in town. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and stood in line for 3 hours, clutching a plastic folder containing receipts and photos of the children eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because our dishwasher had broken months ago. I also brought screenshots of Victor's Instagram posts showing his luxurious vacations while we struggled. Our apartment was cramped and located in the part of town my former colleagues would never visit. I worked 2 cleaning jobs, one at an office building at night and another cleaning houses during school hours, just to make rent each month. We had no cable or internet. I used a prepaid phone and lived in fear of the minutes running out when Noah's school needed to reach me. I washed the kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub when I couldn't afford the laundromat. The water heater in our unit barely functioned, so I'd boil water on the stove and mix it in plastic buckets. Noah never complained, even when his classmates noticed his faded clothes. Lily would hum little songs about bubbles and rainbows while I scrubbed her tiny socks, turning it into a game we played together. I didn't tell anyone how desperate things had become, not even my mother Diana. The shame was too overwhelming. She'd warned me about Victor years ago, noticing how he evaluated people based on their financial worth. But I was too blinded by what I thought was love to hear her concerns. When the court date arrived, my stomach was in knots. Victor had filed for full custody, claiming I was an unfit mother. His petition stated I was financially unstable, unable to provide adequate housing, nutrition, or educational support. The truth he omitted was how he had engineered this very situation. Tiffany's strategy was ruthless. They brought detailed spreadsheets, professional photographs of Victor's 5-bedroom house with its dedicated playroom, and even a proposed private school enrollment package. They wore expensive clothes and exchanged knowing smiles like the outcome was predetermined. I walked into the courtroom wearing a black dress borrowed from a neighbor and a blazer from a church donation box. My plastic folder contained school attendance records showing I never missed a parent-teacher conference, a letter from our landlord confirming I had never been late on rent despite the warning notice, and drawings the children had made of our family. I knew it wouldn't be enough against Victor's legal artillery, but I had to fight for Noah, for Lily. That morning, Noah held my hand tightly as we climbed the courthouse steps, his small fingers warm against mine. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked, his eyes much older than his 7 years. I forced a smile, though it felt brittle enough to shatter. "Yes, sweetheart. It's going to be okay," I said. But I wasn't convinced. I wasn't certain of anything anymore. All I knew with absolute certainty was that I loved my children fiercely. I understood what it meant to skip meals so they could eat, to stay awake sewing patches onto worn clothes, to cry silently in the bathroom after they were asleep so they'd never see my tears. I knew exactly how hard I worked to create a bubble of safety and normalcy when everything around us was crumbling. Inside the formal courtroom, I sat rigid and still, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. I watched Victor scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look in my direction. I listened as Tiffany methodically listed everything I couldn't provide: stable housing, reliable transportation, extracurricular activities, new clothing. Noah wears secondhand shoes with visible holes. His teacher reports he sometimes lacks proper school supplies. Lily's daycare notes she occasionally arrives without breakfast. "This isn't deliberate neglect, Your Honor. This is poverty," Tiffany stated clinically, displaying photos from Victor's supervised visits. "And poverty, while not criminal, creates an environment of instability and risk that these children shouldn't have to endure," she added. I wanted to jump up and scream the truth. I wanted to ask, where were you with Victor when I was pawning my engagement ring to pay for Noah's asthma medication? Where were you when I was teaching Lily to make games out of darkness during power outages? But I remained silent. My free legal advisor had warned me that emotional outbursts would only reinforce their portrayal of me as unstable. So I sat there, humiliation burning through me, as my life was reduced to a series of financial failures. Judge Hoffman nodded thoughtfully at each of Tiffany's points, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like pity. My hope dwindled with each nod, and just when I felt myself beginning to unravel completely, I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. Noah, my observant, brave boy, looked up at me with determined eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I please tell the judge about what I found?" The courtroom temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees when Tiffany Westfield rose to speak. She walked toward the judge's bench with the confident stride of someone who charged $500 an hour and won 90% of her cases. Her tailored navy suit whispered money with every movement as she positioned herself before the large digital display. "If it please the court," she began, her voice crisp and theatrical, "let me present a clear picture of Ms. Barrett's situation." With a practiced tap on her tablet, she brought up a series of charts on the courtroom display. "As you can see, Your Honor, my client's ex-wife has no stable employment history since abandoning her teaching career." She emphasized the word abandoning while glancing pointedly at me. "She receives irregular income from undocumented cleaning work. Her apartment lease is month to month in a building with multiple code violations. These children deserve better than a mother who frequently has to choose between electricity and groceries," she said. I refused to look at Victor sitting there in his custom suit, perfectly trimmed hair, and Italian leather shoes. I didn't need to see his face to know the expression, that calm, detached look as he watched the demolition of my character like it was a business presentation he'd commissioned. This was the same man who had carefully drained our accounts 3 days before telling me he wanted a divorce. The same man who had convinced me to put his name on my car title for insurance purposes and then sold it without telling me. None of that evidence was before Judge Hoffman, though. All he could see were Tiffany's meticulously prepared exhibits, glossy photos of Victor's sprawling suburban house with its dedicated playroom, next to screenshots of my sparse social media presence that somehow made me look negligent. Tiffany flicked to the next slide showing my bank statements with their single-digit balances. She held them up as if they emitted an unpleasant odor. Your Honor, my client provides an exemplary environment for Noah and Lily. They each have their own bedroom with age-appropriate educational materials. They enjoy regular, nutritious meals prepared by their father's housekeeper. They have stable routines. She paused dramatically. Meanwhile, Ms. Barrett has no verifiable income, no employment record, and was issued an eviction warning notice just 3 months ago. Her children's teachers have expressed concerns about inadequate school supplies and occasional hunger. This is simply not a safe or stable situation for a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. I felt heat rising in my face as my hands trembled beneath the table. What she conveniently omitted was how I'd picked up every possible cleaning job I could find while still being available for school drop-offs and pickups. She didn't mention that the eviction notice came after Victor forgot the child support payment was due, or that I'd sold my grandmother's wedding ring to cover the shortfall. She certainly didn't mention how I'd managed to resolve it within 48 hours by working 3 back-to-back cleaning shifts without sleep. Judge Hoffman didn't speak immediately. He studied the documents in front of him, occasionally glancing at the digital display with Victor's financial statements and the photos of his immaculate home. I could read nothing definitive in his expression, but the slight furrow between his eyebrows felt like a death sentence to my hopes. I wanted desperately to stand up and tell him the whole story, how Victor had systematically dismantled my independence, how he'd manipulated me into giving up my career, how he'd isolated me from anyone who might have helped. But my free legal advisor's warnings echoed in my head: don't interrupt. Don't appear emotional or unstable. Don't contradict. Stay calm at all costs. So I sat there, shame burning through me like acid, as my entire life was reduced to a series of financial failures on a PowerPoint slide. My fingers gripped the edge of my chair until they ached. I forced myself to look at Noah and Lily sitting beside me. Lily was coloring on a piece of recycled paper with a broken crayon she'd saved from a restaurant kid's menu. Noah was watching Victor with an unnerving intensity, his small face unnaturally serious for a 7-year-old. Then Tiffany delivered her final blow, the words precise and devastating: Your Honor, the fundamental question is simple: why should she retain custody of these children when she clearly cannot afford to provide for their basic needs? The question reverberated through the courtroom, echoing in my head like a physical assault. Why should I get them? I fought back the tears burning behind my eyes with every ounce of willpower I possessed. My reality looked pathetic on their charts and graphs. I couldn't afford new clothes or fancy extracurriculars or even reliable internet for homework. But I was there every single night. I was the one who knew Noah needed his stuffed dinosaur tucked under his left arm to sleep properly. I was the one who could interpret Lily's made-up words. I was the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. hand-sewing patches onto their clothes and making homemade flashcards because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. None of that counted in this sterile courtroom. Only bank statements mattered here. And in those metrics, I was hopelessly outmatched. Judge Hoffman looked at me with what seemed like a mixture of pity and resignation. He adjusted his glasses and began to speak when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Noah, my thoughtful, watchful boy, was looking up at me with an expression that seemed impossibly adult. Mom, he whispered urgently, can I please show the judge the letter I found in Dad's office when I was looking for my tablet? At first, I didn't understand what he meant. What letter? I whispered back, confused by the sudden determination in his eyes. Noah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. My stomach lurched. I had no idea what it contained, but Victor's sudden rigid posture told me everything I needed to know. His perfectly composed facade cracked visibly. Tiffany's eyes locked onto the paper with laser focus. Noah, what is that? I asked softly, my heart racing. He didn't answer me directly. Instead, he looked straight at Judge Hoffman. "Your Honor," he said in a clear voice that carried through the courtroom, "may I give this to you, please? It's important." Judge Hoffman looked surprised but nodded, his curiosity evident. "You may approach, young man." Noah walked forward with remarkable composure, his small shoulders squared with purpose. He moved past the rows of court personnel and attorneys, past Victor's suddenly alarmed expression, and handed the folded document to Judge Hoffman with both hands. The courtroom fell into a thick, weighted silence. I could see sweat beginning to form on Victor's forehead. Tiffany leaned toward him urgently, whispering something that made his face pale. Judge Hoffman unfolded the paper with careful movements. I watched his face as he read, his expression transforming from confusion to dawning comprehension to something that looked dangerously close to anger. Finally, he looked up, his gaze boring directly into Victor. "Mr. Barrett," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "would you care to explain this document?" The moment Judge Hoffman spoke those words, the atmosphere in the courtroom transformed. Victor's confident posture collapsed. He opened his mouth but produced no sound. Tiffany leaned toward him, whispering rapidly, her usual poise fracturing with each passing second. I leaned forward, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, desperately trying to read the judge's expression. Judge Hoffman held the letter firmly in both hands, studying it again before looking up. His brow furrowed deeply as he began to read aloud. To Victor Barrett, from Meridian Financial Group, subject, Strategic Asset Protection, Divorce Preparation. He paused, glancing around the courtroom before continuing. This correspondence, dated approximately 3 months before your divorce filing, outlines a comprehensive strategy for, and I quote, minimizing apparent income during custody proceedings. He adjusted his glasses. It details specific instructions for establishing shell companies in Wyoming and Nevada, transferring personal assets into corporate holdings, and creating an artificial appearance of reduced income while maintaining actual control of all financial resources. His voice hardened as he continued reading. It specifically recommends, and I quote directly, primary custody should be vigorously pursued as it will significantly reduce support obligations. At minimum, create conditions ensuring she has minimal legal leverage by establishing yourself as the financially stable and responsible parent. He stopped reading, looking up from the paper. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Every eye had turned to Victor, whose composed facade had completely dissolved. Even Tiffany looked genuinely shocked, turning slowly toward him with an expression that clearly asked, "Is this authentic?" I sat frozen, unable to move, caught between disbelief and a cold fury that had nowhere to go. I had suspected Victor's divorce was calculated. I had known he was methodical about money and ruthless about getting what he wanted. But to see it laid out so explicitly, to hear a judge read the cold, strategic dismantling of my life as a business transaction, was staggering. And to realize my 7-year-old son had been carrying this fact alone made my heart ache in ways I couldn't express. Judge Hoffman placed the letter on the bench with deliberate precision. His expression transformed completely as he looked at Victor. "Mr. Barrett," he said, voice carrying new authority, "you have deliberately misled this court. This document demonstrates a calculated effort to manipulate these proceedings through financial deception and weaponize your economic advantage to separate these children from their mother." Victor stood abruptly. "Your Honor, that document is outdated. Those strategies were merely options presented to me, not actions he started to explain." "Sit down immediately, Mr. Barrett," Judge Hoffman commanded, his tone silencing the room. Lily looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I held her close, eyes fixed on the judge. Judge Hoffman turned to me with softened expression. "Ms. Barrett, were you aware of this letter prior to today?" he asked. "No, Your Honor," I answered steadily. "This is the first time I've seen it." "Noah found it." Noah looked up at me anxiously. "I found it looking for my tablet." "Dad's safe was open," he explained quietly. "I took a picture with my iPod and printed it at school. I was scared, but I didn't want them to take us away." Judge Hoffman studied Noah intently. "Young man, what you did took tremendous courage. You did exactly the right thing." He addressed the court decisively. "This hearing is suspended. I'm ordering a full financial investigation into Mr. Barrett's assets. In the interim, primary custody remains with Ms. Barrett, with Mr. Barrett's visitation suspended pending investigation results. The judge's words hung in the air, taking time to become real. My body froze until his decision registered, then my knees weakened. I collapsed into my chair, pulling Noah and Lily against me. Tiffany stood motionless, lips pressed thin, arms rigidly folded. Victor stared ahead, his perfect appearance suddenly absurd against his ashen face. After court dismissed, I remained seated, clutching my children. Noah whispered against my shoulder, "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" "No, sweetheart," I whispered back. "You saved us," I said. He nodded once, understanding far beyond his years. In that moment, I recognized his incredible courage and realized with clarity, though the battle wasn't over, truth had finally broken through the facade. Walking from the courthouse, I held my children's hands tightly, replaying Judge Hoffman's words while barely feeling the ground beneath me. He had halted proceedings, suspended Victor's visitation, and pierced the perfect image Victor had spent thousands constructing. Outside in the November chill, Noah helped Lily with her stuck zipper. Watching his careful fingers work, gratitude overwhelmed me. How could I possibly thank a 7-year-old for showing integrity that had eluded every adult in that courtroom? As we walked toward the bus stop, Noah looked up suddenly. "You know what I think, Mom? Dad's house is prettier, but our apartment feels more like home." I squeezed his hand, unable to speak through my emotion. Noah occasionally brings up the letter. One evening while folding laundry together, he suddenly asked, "Was I wrong to take that paper from Dad's office?" I set down my folding and looked directly into his eyes. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "You were brave. You told the truth when it really mattered," I said. He nodded thoughtfully, then leaned against my shoulder as he returned to matching socks. That simple moment highlighted how children shoulder adult burdens we often overlook. At only 7, Noah had recognized the document's importance, preserved it until the critical moment, and chosen to speak up without any adult prompting. He had chosen justice when no one asked it of him and when staying silent would have been infinitely easier. At Noah's counselor's suggestion, I began therapy at a community center with sliding scale fees. Initially, I choked on the words describing my reality like pawning my wedding ring for rent money, washing clothes in the bathtub at midnight, crying silently in the shower to protect the children. Healing requires oxygen, my therapist explained, encouraging me to voice these experiences. Gradually, I recognized how completely I'd absorbed Victor's narrative, that financial struggle meant maternal failure, that poverty equaled moral deficiency, that I should pretend to be fine rather than acknowledge our hardships. My therapist helped me see what shame had obscured. You weren't weak for struggling. You were incredibly strong for surviving, keeping your children housed and fed against impossible odds, facing court without representation, prioritizing your children while everything collapsed. Last month, I secured a part-time administrative job at a nonprofit that offers benefits. The work is steady, accommodates school schedules, and my supervisor understands when I need flexibility. With my first paychecks, I bought a refurbished laptop and enrolled in online courses to reactivate my teaching certification. Though challenging after years away from academics, the coursework has awakened something I thought was lost: intellectual confidence and belief in my professional future. The children have begun thriving in ways that amaze me daily. Lily has found a best friend at preschool, and Ms. Jenkins reports she's become remarkably more talkative and confident. She's constantly singing now, her teacher noted, and helps the quieter children feel included. Noah joined the school's lunchtime art club, requiring no extra transportation arrangements. His watercolor of a tree was recently displayed in the main hallway. When I asked about the sapling with its disproportionately large root system, he explained simply, "The roots are bigger than the tree right now, but that's okay. That's how it grows strong." Beneath it, he'd written just one word: growing. That perfectly describes our family now, growing steadily from the roots up. The process isn't quick or always visible, but each week moves us further from fear and closer to stability. People often ask how I stayed composed through the court battle without breaking down. The truth is I nearly did shatter completely. But when your children's well-being hangs in the balance, you discover strength you never knew existed. You keep moving forward not because it's easy or you feel capable, but because surrender isn't an option you permit yourself to consider. This journey began in a sterile courtroom where I was labeled too poor to deserve motherhood. It culminated when the purest truth emerged from the smallest voice in that room, Noah, who recognized what real love looked like and defended it. We didn't triumph because of wealth or perfect appearances. We prevailed through honesty, dignity, and refusing to surrender our family's integrity despite impossible odds. The lesson I carry forward is simple: justice doesn't always arrive when or how you expect. Sometimes it comes after you've nearly lost hope, in the form of a folded paper in a child's hand, offered with quiet determination. That day in Judge Hoffman's courtroom changed everything fundamental about our lives. I stopped merely surviving and began living again. Noah released his adult burdens, and Lily sang without restraint. We finally exhaled a breath held for too long.